Presentation of dialogue on Idaho Public Television is made possible through the generous support of the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation, committed to fulfilling the Moore family's legacy of building the great state of Idaho.
Very few people in our country wake up every morning and say to themselves, "Oh my God, my life is a wreck. We lost the war in Vietnam." Nobody does that, myself included, and I'm a veteran of the war.
Coming up next on Dialogue, a conversation with National Book Award winner Tim O'Brien about truth, about memory, and about what it means to go to war. That's Dialogue next. Stay tuned. Hello and welcome to Dialogue. I'm Marcia Franklin. A soldier who ties his girlfriend's stockings around his neck for good luck. A 17-year-old American girl who sports a different kind of necklace, human tongues, and disappears into the Vietnamese jungle. And a Christian Native American who raises his comrades' spirits only to sink into a lagoon of waste. These are just a few of the seemingly fantastical and yet very human characters formed into life and in some instances preserved after death by author Tim O'Brien. And often hovering in the background of his tales is an implied character, the writer himself. O'Brien, who served as an infantryman in the Vietnam War, is considered one of the most influential writers of the era. His novel, Going After Cacciato, won the National Book Award in 1979. And his groundbreaking work, The Things They Carried, was nominated for a Pulitzer Prize in 1991. O'Brien has also penned 5 other novels and a memoir called If I Die in a Combat Zone, Box Me Up and Ship Me Home. Known for smudging what lines exist between imagination and reality, the form his writing takes is as much a topic of reflection as are his stories. And joining me to talk more about his work is Tim O'Brien. Welcome.
Good to be here.
Now, Mr. O'Brien was in Boise as the keynote speaker for the Idaho Humanities Council's Distinguished Humanities Lecture, and we thank that organization for finding time in his schedule for this interview. Well, welcome to Idaho. I understand you've been here before.
I have, yes.
Well, what was it, 45 years now ago that you came home on that flight from Vietnam?
That's right.
The time is, has it gone slowly or quickly or a bit of both?
Well, it seems in most ways like yesterday. It feels as if I had just gotten off that plane and had flown back to my home in Minnesota and have awakened from a kind of dream. The dream has persisted for 45 years, partly because I write about it so much, and partly because I also dream about it all the time. It's part of the person I am.
Now, when you went to Vietnam, you already were knowledgeable and schooled in some of what was happening. Obviously, you didn't know everything. And you had been against the war, and you came back, you didn't have the kind of angst maybe that somebody else might have who had their eyes opened over there. I mean, you didn't come home with a lot of trauma, so to speak, did you?
Well, I came home with trauma, but not that kind, right? Yeah. I came home with bearing a certain burden of participation in something that I probably shouldn't have participated in, given what I believe. You don't go off and kill people if you think it's the wrong thing to do. Most of my fellow soldiers more or less believed in the war, stopping communism and so on. But I saw big troubles with that. I saw a war that looked to me as if it couldn't be won. And a war that, wars are sold to us by and large as pending catastrophes, that if we don't fight a war and kill people, terrible things will happen. We'll lose our freedoms, or dominoes will fall in Southeast Asia, or communists will land on the streets of San Francisco. And we did lose the war, and none of that happened. I'm wearing a shirt right now that my wife got for me in a J.C. Penney's in Austin, Texas. $7.99, and in the back of the shirt there's a little tab that says "Made in Vietnam." It's being bought at a J.C. Penney's in Austin, Texas. High school kids bicycling up and down Highway 1 right now. Business is booming with Vietnam. Relations are normalized. And I think to myself, 5 million dead Vietnamese, 60,000 dead Americans, where's the catastrophe that we thought would happen? Very few people in our country wake up every morning and say to themselves, oh my God, my life is a wreck. We lost the war in Vietnam. Nobody does that, myself included, and I'm a veteran of the war. And that tells me a lot about the rectitude of that war and the necessity of that war when nobody cares if we won or lost.
So when we started going into Iraq and Afghanistan, was it redux for you?
It was. There are so many similarities between the wars we're fighting right now and my war 45 years ago. Some of them are small, but they're important. For example, as a foot soldier in Vietnam, we didn't quite literally know what to shoot at or whom to shoot. We couldn't tell friendly people from enemy soldiers unless they were shooting at us, carrying a weapon. We couldn't tell when we went into a village whether the villagers supported us, were indifferent, or hated us. No way to tell. And it's hard to fight a war when one doesn't have a sense of whom to shoot at. What we did by and large was walk around the countryside waiting to be shot at, and then we'd know who our enemy was. It was a civil war. There were no uniforms. There was no on the other side. There was no front. There was no rear. The sort of classic World War II model of wars, heading for Berlin or heading for Tokyo. We didn't have that. We went in circles. On top of that, most of our casualties in Vietnam in my company were through landmines.
Right.
Today they're called IEDs.
Yeah, same.
Well, how do you shoot back at a landmine? You can't. It's already dead. And yet it's killing you. So, and that's very similar to what our soldiers are experiencing right now.
You have been back to Vietnam. Now, have you been back since '94 when you went back?
No,
okay.
No.
But that '94 trip was seminal for you.
It was an important one because I returned for the New York Times Magazine to do a piece for them. And I went reluctantly. It was not that I didn't want to see Vietnam. I did, all those years later. But it's a long trip. I don't like airplanes. And I was worried that arriving back in Vietnam as a soldier, I might be despised, and it might be painful to face the Vietnamese. To my great surprise, I was treated with incredible love and affection as an American, as a former soldier. I met so many wonderful people. And for the first time on that return trip, Vietnam, the word, no longer meant just the war. It meant Vietnam, the place and the people. And it was really took a load off my spirit to return.
Well, we'll talk about your writing in a moment, but while I'm thinking about it, when our country celebrates holidays such as Veterans Day or Memorial Day, do you think that it's being done in the best way, in the highest way? Do you think that, tell me what happens to you on those holidays?
Well, I have so many contradictory, competing responses to days like Veterans Day or the 4th of July. On the one hand, I think it's good to celebrate sacrifice for one's country. On the other hand, I worry that Vietnamese, in my case, are just taken out of the equation entirely. There were 5 million dead Vietnamese, according to the Vietnamese. We say 3 million, but either way, it's a lot of dead people. And that's not counting the mutilated and the orphans and the Gold Star mothers on both sides. And I think that as a country, America is a good enough and great enough place where we can think of others 45 years later and what they endured. The war was fought on Vietnamese soil. The Vietnamese were the primary victims of that war, if that's the right word. They died. And to leave them out of the equation and simply celebrate ourselves seems to me, it doesn't seem the America I grew up back in the 1950s. I thought our country was more inclusive and would embrace others more than we do.
That might be anathema to some veterans, though.
To some it is.
To celebrate. And how would it work for, World War II veterans on Veterans Day? Would we celebrate Germans? I mean,
well, we'd celebrate the Germans that
resisted.
That resisted, and the Germany that is now. We have relations with Germany right now. Right. They're one of our allies. That there's a thing called forgiveness in this world, and moving forward, that a lot of my fellow soldiers don't want to do. They're locked in the past. They'll forever say, we could have won that war if it hadn't been for the media. We could have won that war if we had nuked Hanoi. There are a lot of what-if things that bother my fellow soldiers, and my thoughts are sort of more toward the future.
You've always enjoyed writing, but you didn't think you could make a living at it. What precipitated the desire to write about all this instead of just going? Well, I know you were going to graduate school at Harvard when you started writing your memoir. What does it do for you?
Well, I'd wanted to be a writer from the time I was a little boy, 8, 9 years old. I loved reading books, and because I loved reading them, I wanted to make them. I wanted to do them myself. And that lifelong desire to be a writer collided with my being drafted to fight in Vietnam. There was suddenly material that seemed to me of such import that it wasn't a decision to write. I had to write. When I came back from the war, I was brokenhearted. I was full of guilt and a sense of why did I do the things I did during that war. And it wasn't a question of, well, I think I'll sit down and write for 2 hours. It was I just had to do it. It was a physical need to put what I had gone through on paper in a certain form. And the form for me was always story, to tell a story, not to preach or not to make political points, but simply to let the characters, some based on real people, some invented, carry the reader through an experience, trying so much as possible to anchor the reader in the shoes or the boots of those characters. What if you were opposed to a war? What if you went to the war anyway, for whatever reasons, even though you were opposed to it? What if you were ordered to begin shooting at people? How would you feel looking at the bodies afterward, especially if some of them were 12 years old or 5 years old or old women? What would you carry home from a war? Would you just write it off as, that's war for you? Dead 5-year-olds? Would you wake up in the middle of the night with a little fever and a little sense of tear coming on, a sense of responsibility? So it's a way of trying to make what seems abstract to so many people. The word war itself is abstract. We use it all the time. We hear it all the time on the news. But unless you're in it, or your child is in it, or your lover or husband is in it, there's an abstraction to it all. And my job as a writer, and not even job, I feel it's my responsibility as a writer to try to make it feel more personal through a story.
Some people seem to be so disappointed that what they read and the things they carried wasn't true in some instances.
Yeah, I mean, they're disappointed in a kind of a sophomoric way, I think, that it'd be like finishing Huckleberry Finn, that Mark Twain did everything in his power to make you believe in that story. Dialogue, Hannibal, borrowing from his own life. In the end, it's fiction. And I look at the things they carried pretty much the same way as I did everything in my power to make those stories feel real to people. Even the fabulous ones that you mentioned earlier, to make them, well, it's fabulous, but it could have happened.
When I was reading it, thought that could be really a cheerleader type girl going to Vietnam and
well,
wearing
not only could there was.
I understand people have come up to you and said
Yeah.
that they for sure know that there
Yeah.
was that person.
Yeah.
And this blurring of lines is, or smudging of lines as I called it, it's important to you, isn't it? Because ambiguity really is what life is about. I mean, nothing is for certain for certain.
It is. The book is really a rebel call against absolutism. It's so easy to say absolutely, this is true and that is true and this is true. But when I hear that sort of thing, everything in my temperament quarrels with that. I'll find exceptions, and history is replete with declarations of what is true and is not true. They're later undermined by what we learn later. It happens in science all the time. Happened to Copernicus. It happened to Galileo, where certain people declare, the Earth is the center of the universe, and we learn out later that just physically it is not.
Well, and life and love,
Yeah.
there's all these ambiguities.
And we find them out about ourselves,
Yeah.
which is what happened to me in Vietnam. I thought I was a nice, decent, Midwestern guy, kind of like the Lone Ranger. I'd always do the right thing, and I'd be wearing the white hat. And I learned the hard way in Vietnam, as every soldier learns, not just me, that there's a dark side to the human personality, that when you're scared enough, when you're angry enough, as happens when your friends are dying all around you and you're being shot at and you're walking through, that you're capable of doing bad stuff. And I learned that about myself, and it's a burden that not just I carry, but I think every combat soldier carries. If you're in the rear, typing letters, maybe you won't learn that. Or if you're driving a truck behind barbed wire, you may not learn this about yourself, but if you're in combat, you do learn it. And it's a hard lesson it undermines everything you believed about yourself that you thought was true. And truth is a complex and it's a fluid thing. It was once true for me that there was a Santa Claus when I was 6. Is it true anymore? It's not. It's not true anymore. And almost everybody undergoes that experience. What was once true no longer is. People get married and they're in love. And 12 years later, the truth has changed for some people. They're not in love anymore, and they're not married anymore. What matters is something about the human spirit. And that's what stories for me are about. They're about the human spirit struggling to find joy and find decency and civility and some sort of contentment. There's a struggle that through every novel, Huck Finn went through the struggle. Discontented in Hannibal, lights out, goes down the Mississippi in search of something, which is a kind of happiness. Not happy there, and all of us have to make that journey down the birth canal, out into the world, and through our lives. And that's what, for me, a story is about. It's about that journey of that character, or that character, or that one. And to me, it's pretty much irrelevant how much is based on reality. What matters is the story.
You talked about happiness and stories and finding some happiness. One of the things that I know that's brought joy to you is being a father late in life, later in life, I should say.
Oh, no.
Not late in life.
Really late in life. I'm 150.
So, you're, what, 69
69,
right now?
just turned 69.
And you have a 12-year-old and a 10-year-old.
I do.
Keeping you busy, keeping you happy.
Yes.
Providing you fodder for your next book.
I've been working on a book now for almost 5 years about being an older father, which I sometimes say facetiously, but I really mean it. I try to put a happy face on it, but it does feel a little bit like Vietnam. That there's a terror that goes with being in charge of 2 human lives, 2 little boys. I'm always afraid for their safety, the way I used to be afraid for my friends. Are you going to I'm terrified of them coming to the age when they can drive in Austin, Texas, where I live.
Or decide to join the military.
Or join the military.
Does that worry you?
I'm worried about drugs. I'm worried about booze. I'm worried about everything, just as I was 45 years ago worried for the safety of my friends in Vietnam, who were a little bit like children. We were young, and they'd goof off and they'd kill themselves. Plus there's the whole issue of mortality, that I'm 69. Where am I going to be in 25 years? Probably not with my kids. And that press of mortality, which I felt in Vietnam at age 21, is back again now in a big way, the same way it was there then. How much will my kids actually remember of me? So I worry about that, and part of what I'm working on now is to try to leave for my kids, to leave a record of their father, how much I love these kids, and how afraid I was for their lives, not just their literal lives, but for their futures. The value that we place on our lives, our own lives, is changed by having children. I used to value good reviews. I used to value doing good work as a writer. But now, even more than that, I value these two children, their lives.
One of your children's names is Tad, which made me think of the son of President Lincoln.
That's why we call him Tad. You know, there's a photograph.
Of him reading to
Exactly.
his child. So what do you read to your children?
Well, I don't just read to them. I make up stories for them. That's
how
part
fun.
of the joy of it. I've made up a character named Howard, the dumbest human being to have ever, lived on our planet. And the troubles he gets into. I've made up a pigeon character named Hank, who can't fly, but keeps trying to fly. And what happens to Hank? That being a writer, you do have an opportunity to try out your material on your kids. And if they laugh, you've succeeded. If they say after, what the hell was that about? You got to go back and revise the story and make it a better story.
What would you do if one of your children came to you and said, Dad, I want to enlist. I'm proud of you. I'm proud of who you are, and I would like to join the military.
Well, I would tell them to go read my books, number one. In the end, a father cannot dictate to a kid what you're going to do, what you can't do. You shouldn't try to do that sort of thing. It's free will. I believe in it. But I believe in informed free will. I would ask him to talk to some of the people who have been on your show that you mentioned to me before we went on, people who have served in Afghanistan and Iraq. I would ask him to consider, this. A bullet can kill the enemy, that's for sure. But a bullet can also make an enemy, and that's for sure. Because if that bullet hits a 4-year-old kid in the head, you've got an angry mom, dad, cousin, best friend, brother, so just do the multiplication. You've made enemies. So violence can achieve ends. We know that from World War II. It was justified violence. But there are occasions when violence, military force, can do the opposite of what you want. You can manufacture new enemies, as we did during my time in Vietnam, with every dead child and every burned house, every destroyed rice paddy, every defoliant we drop. It'd be like in Sioux City, Iowa, if a bunch of ISIS guys walk through the fields there. How do you think the people in Iowa are going to respond? They're not going to like it any more than the Vietnamese did in my era. And I'd ask my kids to consider the opposite of sort of the conventional truth of things. We're a culture and a nation that somehow believes in quick fixes through military means. Sometimes they're required. But for every one that's required, there's a war against Mexico, or a war against the Philippines, or a Spanish-American war, or the extermination of the American Indian, or the war in Vietnam, or a war to get rid of weapons of mass destruction that didn't exist. A reason to go to war. There are times when military force is justified. I'm not a pacifist, but I am against bad wars. I'm against wars that are unwinnable. And I think that there has to be I would ask my kids to make a distinction between kind of a quick draw mentality and a considered, wise, informed mentality about when violence is necessary and when it's not. And in these days, in the absence of a draft, it's so easy to be belligerent in your rhetoric because you don't have to do anything. Your kids don't have to do anything. They don't have to die or kill people unless they volunteer to do it. And as much as I hated the draft when I got drafted, now I see the justice in it and the rectitude. Right now, 0.5% of the families in our country bear the entire burden. That's it. Everybody else gets a free pass. And you're allowed to go out and spout your belligerent rhetoric without any repercussions personally. And I object to that. I think that it's hypocritical to say, yeah, let's have a war, but my kid's not going to die in it, and I'm not going to either.
It sounds like you would have, the discussions would continue for...
My children and I are in for 6 or 7 years of this until they leave for college.
You've won many awards for your writing. You've also won a Peace Award.
Mm-hmm. Thank God. Yeah.
How does that rank for you?
Well, that ranks the highest. I mean, I've won a lot of big awards, but to get the Dayton Literary Peace Prize Award was something that I yearned for. Not that award, but I've spent my whole life writing books that are called war books. But I've never looked at them that way. I've looked at them as books that are set in war, right. But the purpose is not let's all go to war. The purpose is to say, let's be cautious about it. Let's understand the consequences of wars on human lives, and not just the soldiers. What about the mothers of people coming home in coffins or without legs or arms? What about issues of rectitude? Is it right to do this stuff? Those things matter to me a lot because I lived through them. As I said earlier, it's so easy we're at war right now on the other side of the world. But it's so easy to go through days and weeks and months and not even think about what others are enduring in our names. And not even to think about should we be there at all? And are we achieving our ends that are worth the sacrifice? Which is, for me, again, kind of circles back to literature. That through a story, you hope that you can somehow make someone lying in bed at 2 in the morning reading your book feel a little bit of what you felt 40 years ago.
Well, thank you.
Great pleasure.
Thanks so much for spending time with me and by proxy our viewers. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
You've been listening to author Tim O'Brien, who won a National Book Award for his novel Going After Cacciato. His book, The Things They Carried, was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize and is on Amazon's list of 100 books to read in a lifetime. I recommend it as well. If you'd like to learn more or to watch this interview again, check out the Dialogue website. Just go to idahoptv.org and click on Dialogue. For Dialogue, I'm Marcia Franklin. Thanks for tuning in.
Presentation of Dialogue on Idaho Public Television is made possible through the generous support of the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation, committed to fulfilling the Moore family's legacy of building the great state of Idaho. Check out our website, become a friend on Facebook, or follow us on Twitter.